need to worry about it because the two people that we have here to talk about data, AI, and automation, and the whole world of smart farming are really some of the most smart, trusted people that I've looked to in my journey into building Grow Computer and ending up on the NYC Ag Collective board. And so, my name is Daniel Nelson. I am currently the treasurer of the NYC Ag Collective. Thank you so much for joining us at our virtual conference. These conversations will be recorded. We're going to try and figure out some great ways to keep this content and allow this information to be shared both today and into the future. And so we're excited to have these speakers here to talk about smart farming. And so with no further ado, I think I'm just going to allow Joyce and Eric to just do a quick few-minute introduction about their backgrounds, their work with smart farming. Both of them come from such great places. And so, Joyce, why don't you take it away from Starship Enterprise?
Okay, all right. Greetings from the Starship Enterprise. Thank you very much, Daniel, for allowing me to participate in this conference. It's been a while coming. The pandemic had held us off for a couple of years, and so I'm glad to be sort of back in person. My name is Joyce Hunter, and I am the executive director of the cybersecurity think tank called the Institute for Critical Infrastructure Technology. I came from Department of Agriculture, where I was the deputy CIO and then the acting CIO under the Obama administration, and have kept very much in touch with the food and agriculture industry. I am also the senior advisor and advisor on the advisory board of CyberAg, which is interested in doing education outreach research for the food and cybersecurity industry in agriculture. Oop, you're on mute, Daniel.
David's here in the backstage, so we're going to bring him on. Eric, why don't you do a quick overview of your background?
Yeah, so my name is Eric Hager. I'm currently the head of product at a startup called Bloomfield Robotics. What we do is we do deep learning-based image assessment of the health and performance of specialty crops. Primarily, we work in wine, table, and juice grapes, and they're also in blueberries around 4 countries around the globe. My background is interesting. I have kind of a hybrid background as an entrepreneur, but also sort of software engineer. I worked for the World Food Program for 3 years, launching an initiative called H2 Grow, which was hydroponic, value engineered hydroponics for kind of refugees and other kind of more temporary communities. That's grown to, it started from a small pilot in Peru to now there's, I think, 30 countries and about 100,000 people impacted by this. So, I come at it from both the development and very kind of, private sector, background, but that's me.
Awesome, thank you. David, welcome. Perfect timing. Welcome to the Data AI Automation panel. And we're just doing quick participant interviews. And so why don't you just kick it off and introduce yourself to the audience?
I'd be happy to. And Daniel, thank you for having me, and to my colleagues, thank you. And I apologize to you all for being tardy. Had a little bit of issue with Zoom and emails. My background is in closed environmental agriculture. I started with a love of plants at an early age, and then fell in love with orchids and really focused on growing a diverse population of the largest flowering family of plants on the planet. And so with that, I got very good at recreating microclimates. And so professionally, I've been able to utilize my training and skills to do a host of really interesting projects. So I wrote curriculum and then wrote grants to bring STEM into the Georgia public schools based on horticulture and hydroponics. That was funded by Google. I've gotten to do some really interesting consulting for movies like The Hunger Games and Black Panther. And then I've also worked with universities on farm to table initiatives, really helping them use the technology at their disposal to be a more economical and sustainable campus. With that all in my past life, I'm also the chief science officer at Agrify, a company focused on closed environmental growth chambers, as well as extraction technology, where I often and routinely get to leverage our technology to help growers improve using AI and automation in real life. So it's a real pleasure to be on stage with all of you and to be able to share with this panel.
Amazing. Wow. There's so much knowledge here, and I guess the best place to start, and just gonna throw it out there. Maybe we'll start with Joyce, because I think you have such an interesting background. Technology-wise, from a farming perspective, what are the things that have really made a big difference in helping to get farmers their food to American crops? And I think you see it from such a interesting, back end angle. What are the things that have really made the biggest leaps in just the last few years that have enabled more farmers to come to market? You're muted, by the way. Sorry.
I would say farmers markets. Actually, the proliferation of farmers markets around the country has been the biggest area of growth for small family farmers, particularly. And then the new innovative in urban areas, such as vertical farming. So the Department of Agriculture having an actual department specifically for small family farmers or new and beginning farmers. I think that that's a great organization. And if some of the small growers have not examined the new and beginning farmers section of the website for Department of Agriculture, I would suggest that you go there because they do a lot of hand-holding, providing a lot of technical assistance, and giving you everything that you possibly need in order to be a successful, thriving small business family farmer. Also, don't forget that small family farmers are small businesses. So you have two angles. You could go to it from the Department of Agriculture angle, or you could go to the Small Business Administration and get some assistance there as well. So I think, for family farmers or growers, you have two avenues of being able to get to where you need and get the assistance that you need. Also, I think everybody is looking at doing these sustainable farms in their own gardens. You find a lot of the HBCUs now have these, or particularly those that are land grant universities, like the University of the District of Columbia. They have small farms all around the District of Columbia. And they also have a rooftop garden. In fact, they are the largest land grant university with a rooftop garden. I think they have something like 46 acres on the top of their building in downtown Washington, D.C., which is really very unique. And so I think a lot of the growers could potentially also partner with some of these universities, which are growing out or outgrowing some of their agricultural initiatives.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about that in the policy in the food policy in New York, and how some of those agencies are doing that in New York. And then just a pitch for the next panel is going to be hydroponics and education. And so we have an unbelievable panel of folks that are doing some amazing stuff. So thank you, Joyce. Eric, talking about AI a little bit more, and how AI and how some of your work using machine learning and computer vision has actually been implemented in a farm. Could you talk about some of the successes of the way that, or the best ways that some of those technologies have actually been implemented in your experience?
Yeah, I think, one of the fears, I guess, about AI on the farm is, in any sort of automation technology is labor replacement. And I see some, people are a little bit too quick to try to go to replace, human labor in the fields with AI and automation solutions. But the more successful solutions I've seen are those that augment current farmers and sort of match their sort of ancestral and intuitive knowledge with, new data points that they're getting in the field to give them kind of better input to their own decision-making processes and their own sort of, time and tested sort of methods that they have out, with all that experience in the field. So, and that's where we try to come in, is more, just being able to kind of more scalably and, more cheaply and quickly, image and analyze, features of plants like it's like the rate of leaf growth, its rate of shoot growth, all these things that when a farmer is actually looking at the crop and trying to make an assessment of the condition of his or her fields, all those are coming in, all those sort of things like, oh, how do my leaves look? What color are they? How big are my berries, et cetera. That goes into their sort of decision-making process about what to do and where their farm is in terms of like if it's on target or off target. And so what we try to do is provide a lot more information way more scalably, to allow farmers to like make a much more informed decisions rather than making that decision for them, right? That is the future, ultimately when we have enough, data and experience. But right now we're not trying to bridge the gap by prescribing something, which, I think everyone's very excited about AI and automation, on farms, but it's, I don't see that as being successful, implementation in the near term. It's more augmentation of what currently exists on the farm, and that's, human labor. Humans are great at what they do, frankly, out there in the field.
Awesome. And so, David, this is a really interesting question for you now, where we had one side where you're able to look at some of the tools that are available from a policy perspective and from actually delivering. When you're looking at a new solution, how do you balance those tools from the policy and the top-down perspective with some of this new technology and some of the new processes and data points that are available to build farms where, you're not going to be there all the time? And so you need some sort of technology to help augment you on making sure that you could deliver on the goals that you set. How do you figure out how to balance those two things with both people and the tech?
I think Eric said something that was really important to repeat, which is there's a lot of labor fear around technology and automation. Cultivators, farmers, they view it potentially as a replacement. And I want you to know that while there are robotics that can, in fact, replace human beings in some tasks, most of that is just going to change the labor profile of what's needed on the farm. You're going to need more mechanically and technically advanced personnel to work and keep these robots moving. But that said, I think a lot of the AI being developed now, again, to Eric's point, is to empower cultivators, to empower farmers, and not to replace them. Think of it as giving them a better set of tools in which to use to make their job better, to produce better crops, to do it with greater efficiency, to do it with less physical, harsh labor that might have a toll on their bodies. I think that as we set up new farms around the country and around the globe, the technology that we've developed and proliferated is really around two things. It's an ecosystem approach to cultivation. It's where you have software and hardware that have been designed to work together specifically to provide a level of data and control to farmers that they need. And then it's also focused on a very data-heavy model where we are recording upwards of, in our new generation of technology, about 12.5 million data points per growth chamber per year. And that level of granularity in the data sets allows us and allows our client operators to very closely reproduce desirable conditions within the growth chambers, within the VFUs, and ultimately allows them to scale and deliver on a consistent product. Now, while this might be less interesting in lower value food crops, in high value medicinal crops, the ability to push yield by 5% or push oil concentration, which is desirable in thyme and rosemary and lots of herbs, is well rewarded. And so I think that this allows us a lot of leverage in the technology and to put technology into place and into practice that might not be affordable for all farmers.
Curious if anyone wants to respond to. There's so much great stuff put out there before I keep directing questions.
And David and Eric and Dan, I think that there is an opportunity, particularly when you start talking about technology solutions. There's an opportunity for upskilling. I know a lot of people are, afraid of technology replacing them, but actually for those who are running the farms or the farmers, producers, and agriculture folks in that area that look at this as maybe a opportunity to keep people, to retain people, because you're doing something new and innovative, and they can see a growth path. So from what they were doing before, they can see that there is a path to a greater sustainability, because then your skills will are more valued once you get that technology under your belt.
I think that's a really good point, because when it comes to the adoption of robotics on the farm, I think the labor availability to support and maintain those machines is probably a pretty big bottleneck in actually rolling this out. So that's kind of an interesting sort of catch-22, right? Where people think our robots are actually going to replace them, but maybe one of the bigger impediments to their adoption is the fact that there's no humans with the skills available to really support them when they inevitably break down. And this is one of the things, too, where people forget, when you put hardware and you put your machines in like the harsh, environments of many farms, right? How likely things are to fail. So the maintenance and support aspect of that, which probably in the short term will be human driven and maybe become automated at some point, when we have things like the Starship Enterprise. But it's definitely, there is a nice synergy between robots and humans, for a long time.
I just want to add one thing, which is I think that as we talk about robotics and we look at their impact and how they're entering into agriculture, I think that we can look at not just the repair profiles, but what these pieces of technology are really enabling. So whether it's disease identification, you still need a human to go over and verify. Whether it's picking up on sensor data that you might have an issue with the ceiling in one edge of a greenhouse based on a temperature anomaly. Whether it's, helping to harvest. I know on social media this week, at least on mine, I saw a bunch of feeds of an automated apple picker. But while I look at all of these different impacts and potential ways the technology is coming into the industry, I am reminded that initially we see a lot of robotics and automation that's focused on bigger and bigger throughput. I can pick 10 apples in an hour. I can pick 12. I can pick X more than you. Eventually, though, what I've seen is the total throughput takes a back seat to the level of automation that can be provided, because at a certain point there's an inflection on the labor costs, and this is going to be dependent on the labor market, the crops, but I think that throughput becomes a secondary decision in the process to the level of automation as it pertains to really how these robots are going to help the cultivators achieve these tasks and what those specific tasks are, and how cost effective the reduction can be.
Well, I think, Joyce, I'm sorry, please.
And you want to start attracting younger workers, right? I mean, agriculture is not sexy. Let's be serious. When I go, I forgot to mention this, but when I was at Department of Agriculture, I created a data science camp for underserved and underrepresented youth, and 14 to 17 years old. And when they come into camp, the camp is free. So when you get these urban kids and they come into the camp, the first day, their eyes are rolling and their heads are wobbling back and forth. Oh my God, an agriculture camp. And once we start getting into the data science and like you said, the robotics and geospatial, their eyes start lighting up. They start sitting forward in their chairs. And this is not, and I mentioned to them, I said, this is not Beverly Hillbillies and Green Acres. Well, we all understand what that is, but they have no idea what I'm talking about when I say Beverly Hillbillies and Green Acres. But so this is a way of saying, agriculture has come into the 21st century, and you can attract those younger workers, those workers that would normally not consider agriculture as a career.
Right. Once again, we're going to talk about that at 2:00, and the panel for hydroponics and education that we've put together might be the best one that's ever been put together. So I strongly encourage everybody to check that out later. But I think y'all started to talk about something that speaks to my heart, the economics of this, right? When you're starting a farm or you're thinking about any of these farms as entities, don't we have to think of them as businesses? And so if you're a farmer, really at what point does it even make sense to start to invest this capital or invest operationally into these solutions? Can you do it in every crop? Personally, I believe that there is a market inflection point for every crop, where it gets traditionally more expensive and the exponential costs of doing indoors or controlled are coming down. But is that real? Like, does this technology actually start to make some of these realities where you're able to build super functional, very efficient, maybe not completely labor removed, but 20% of your labor costs could be removed by having better monitoring and controls and automation? At what point does this start to make sense for a farmer that is trying to do this to make it real for them?
I don't think I could put a dollars and cents number on it. But I think we're seeing, particularly with things like deep learning based image assessment, we're seeing, I think, like a level of maturity in that technology where farmers can start to trust sort of automated sort of crop scouting to inform their management practices. So I think starting with technologies like we know that this is a relatively mature technology now. Neural nets for image recognition and feature recognition, all that. I think we can trust those things, that have been in research and actually in the commercial marketplace for a long enough time where it sort of makes sense. And I think that's the rub here with any of these. When does it make sense? Is, well, when is it reliable enough that it can be trusted over a human? And so I think even with some of the more mature AI technologies, that's still, the jury's still a little bit out on that, as far as like if the risk of trusting that AI like justifies the reward on that, right? I think there's still this calculation that a lot of farmers are doing versus like just trusting the traditional methods versus relying on something completely new and automated and out of their control, right? Which is just sort of a painful thing anyway. They're relinquishing that control. I mean, you have to be very reliable. There has to be a very tangible, strong value proposition tied, to that in order for them to move to it.
Eric, I think that's really interesting. You're talking about the inflection point where the technology provides benefit. And I think that, where I am with the technology personally is to trust it, but verify. I trust in the tech, the image recognition is good. I still send someone over to physically go and scout the area when there's a problem, but it does save time. It does definitely reduce labor. But I think it goes to a bigger point with Daniel, you asking about, the right time to bring in technology. The first thing is, if you're going to decide that, and like it was discussed, it's a financial cost benefit analysis possibly that's going to give you that information. You need to know your OpEx costs. I find a lot of farmers don't have that information readily available at a granular enough level. And so when you're deciding whether or not to invest tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars or more into technology, you need to be able to model out what the impact is going to be. You can be conservative, you can be generous, but bad data is worse than having no data at all, because it's going to lead you to make bad decisions. So at least we can trust what we don't know. When I look at the automation I'm seeing in indoor vertical farming and closed environmental ag, I'm seeing tremendous advances which make it cost competitive with traditional field culture when you factor in gasoline costs, refrigerated trucking, and the environmental impact. If it's just apples to apples, how much it costs to grow a head of iceberg in the area of California and Arizona that you do that versus what it is to even try and grow a head iceberg hydroponically in New York, it's a different animal. But there are varieties that now can be grown hydroponically, and you can, if you account for those fuel costs, the refrigerated trucking, you can actually make a case where this is absolutely economically viable now. And then it becomes a question of scale.
I think, I think AI and automation helps address that scale issue, right? I think vertical farms, I think they struggle with, to be really cost competitive. I think indoor ag struggles with the uniformity problem, especially when you get to a certain scale. I mean, it's just hard to create a uniform environment, with all of these lights emitting heat, and all the plants emitting water, and that contains heat. I mean, it's like trying to regulate that environment. I mean, that's a struggle. I mean, even I've heard for even some of the successful vertical farmers in the world, like that have the highest level of control, like it's still not granular enough, and when does it become like sort of cost effective to control a vertical farm based on like a per level or per plant, sort of temperature and an image-based assessment, it's
Eric, I love that you said this, because that actually is what Agrify took on as our challenge. So our growth chambers are completely climate independent of all the others, and they stack vertically, giving you upwards of 6 layers of climate controlled cultivation. But they also integrate a flooring module so employees are comfortable and easy working environment, because ergonomics really does matter in terms of productivity and how long you can retain those employees. But we recognize that, and what we have done is really use the technology and the research, which is funded by Higher Value Crops, to then allow that technology and prove out those benefits. And then it becomes able to trickle down into other agricultural scenarios where the crop value might be a little bit less, but it allows the technology to be proven. But to your point, it is tough to justify some of those costs. And as you go up in levels of vertical farming, you stratify the environment, you add a higher plant density per cubic volume of airspace, and it becomes that much more challenging to maintain an ideal climate, which is why the tech that we've produced really came to be.
I'm curious if, maybe Joyce has something to say about this too, but I think this idea of proving, new emerging agricultural technologies in a way that they can be like financeable, right, is important, right? Because farming equipment and technology, just like a tractor, right? I mean, even just a generator is like $100,000. You don't think that like farmers are spending that kind of money on they're spending millions of dollars, even at the 100-acre small family farm level. So I'm wondering, like, from a policy standpoint, on Joyce's end, like how kind of government plays a role in increasing the accessibility of technology to farmers, and what do the private, like enterprises need to do in order to kind of make them sort of backable by the government or other kind of, financing sources like that?
I think a lot of people don't understand their own power as a constituent. One of the things that I would highly recommend, they're getting ready to start talking about the Farm Bill for 2023. And anybody who is interested in making sure that technology is a part of the Farm Bill should absolutely get in touch with their Congress people and make sure that they understand what some of the challenges are that they're facing, and what Congress can do in order to ensure that Department of Agriculture helps out with those kinds of things. And that's what the Farm Bill in 2018 did, in the Farm Bill that I worked on for 2013. It put in a lot of those technology constructs so that farmers would have the ability to go and search out some of these opportunities. And that's where also the new and beginning farmers, to provide them with technical assistance so that they can take advantage of some of these technologies that are available. So I would highly encourage, they're starting to talk about it now. So I would highly encourage them to go to the chairs. On the House side, it's David Scott from Georgia. And on the Senate side is Debbie Stabenow from Michigan. But they have their committees, and you can go online and look for their committees. And I would hammer them with requests and sit down and meet with them, because they want to hear from the people on the ground level. And I can't stress this enough that unless your voice is heard, politics is local. Literally, all politics is local. And unless people in New York or the rural areas of California, it's all of us together to be able to make our point known for technology and for technology improvements. And I know that Daniel knows that one of my passions, besides my kids and my camp, is securing the data. So you have the data, you have AI and all this connectedness, and then you have automation. And, so what are you going to do about making sure that it's secure and sustainable? And people are not taking this seriously. They're thinking that, oh, it's going to happen to them. It's going to happen to somebody else. We saw what happened to JBS in 2021.
Well,
So everybody's game.
We're trying to work on a transaction in Suffolk County, and Suffolk County in New York is currently being ransomware attacked, and their whole municipality computer systems are off. And so, these things are real. Like you have to take consideration. And, I think all of you could talk about this, the amount of steps on the supply chain that have data opportunities. And, maybe we could talk about, from the farm, we're talking about data for a farmer. What about data for a food company or a food policy or a different type of entrepreneur that might be trying to bring food into there? What kind of, how do these tools, or how could these tools, I mean, Eric, from our conversations with Isabel and the work you've been doing in Nigeria, not to spoil that too much, but some of those where you're able to network these things and think a step up from the farm. And how do those networks of farms or systems, are they working? Does it work at that level even better than maybe even the local farm level?
And I think what you're referring to mainly is around like traceability, right? And how do we provide transparency into the way in which a unit of food was grown? So to prove that it meets acceptance criteria, either of like a domestic buyer or an importer. Like in the case, I have a small startup based in Nigeria. I started it's a greenhouse production company about 4 years ago. And so we developed some software, right, that allow us to track all the, and like David said earlier, like farmers don't have a good handle of OpEx, right? So that's really what we wanted to do, was get off of pen and paper, and let's just like start tracking like what inputs we use, when we use them, how much they cost. We're going to start to build up a P&L of the farm just to assess performance and aid in our selection of different varieties and the type of crop that we were going to grow and try to go to market with. So yeah, we have a mobile application that's used by the employees that tracks, okay, whenever they use insecticide, whenever they see like a bug or something, they take a picture and we troubleshoot it. But the idea there is, right, to provide that level of transparency to, say, US importers, from goods, produced in Nigeria, like, hey, that this is actually grown safely. And currently there's not really like a strong export pipeline of fresh goods from, really any country in West Africa to the United States or Europe. It's mainly dominated by like East African countries like Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, things like that. So, my goal is to try to bring some of this opportunity into West Africa and stabilize, the market there a little bit by providing a consistent export market. From Nigeria to the United States or to Western Europe, UK primarily.
Not to necessarily throw another fly into the ointment, but are you thinking about, or have you thought about, or are you using blockchain?
No, I'm not, because I'm just trying to keep it simple, right? Like, yeah, but like securing this information and providing that that record, that immutable record of a transaction from, farm here to distributor X to buyer Y all the way in the United States. I think those opportunities exist in spades, for that, for sure.
Eric, in fact, the opportunity has been well established and worked on. IBM has a food trust platform, which is probably one of the preeminent solutions. It uses blockchain for food transparency and traceability across the process. And I think as big as IBM is, it will help with this adoption globally. Whether this is the final platform at rest that people work with, I think it is probably the largest one that I'm aware of. And Joyce, to your point, by having it on the blockchain ledger and Eric making it immutable, you're really allowing transparency, not just for the businesses, but theoretically for even the consumer to make more informed decisions about what farmer grew their product, what pesticides were used. And as we continue to evolve, we see consumers voting with their dollars. You know, they can't always choose the politician that might be majority, but they're going to vote with where they spend those dollars. And, you know, giving the consumer that data set is invaluable to farmers. And I would encourage all farmers, small and large, to build their narrative, to build the story around their farm and let people know that they are supporting an individual, a business, a family, a company, because this is a convergence of social media, of technology, of agriculture. And if you ignore it, you will get left behind. I mean, how many of you have Blockbuster still near your house?
So read through the lines there, make a TikTok account. And
Oh gosh.
There you go. There you go.
I gotta say, there's some really great stuff. There's some creators that talk about these innards of the food system, and to see it from, I know from my perspective, seeing 8 million onions in one place from one farmer in Idaho, it changes the scale of which you think about food systems. And, you know, that's why I think it's so interesting. And Joyce, we'll kick it back to you here too. And just thinking about it from maybe even another level up where, you know, how do you think about, how does the government think about it from a data model? I know you can't speak to recent administrations, and I won't ask you to, but what was the thesis when you were there about how you were thinking about it from that top level down?
And that's the reason why in 2013, the open data policy was created, so that everybody, whether they be commercial or government, can post their information on data.gov, and then everybody has access to it, and they can, you know, smash up tools and technologies in order to get a solution that works for them. And so that's one way of being able to ensure that the data is secure, or not only secure, but the data is available for everybody to use. So there's no, you know, this is my data and I'm going to keep hold of it and nobody's going to be able to get to it. So data.gov allows organizations to be able to proliferate all of their information so that everybody has access to it, so that they can create new entrepreneurs, new products, new solutions. There are things going on right now in the healthcare area where the National Science Foundation has put out a proposal for a grant for people to come up with new models for new platforms that people can collaborate with and develop other solutions that can handle a region or nationally. And so I think that that's something that agriculture could do. I think that there's more room for collaboration than a lot of people are used to. And I think people should take advantage of that. They should organize in their own local communities. And like I said, you know, hammer your representatives. That's the only way you're going to get your thoughts and your ideas into the hands of Congress. And they're starting those conversations now. There was nothing more powerful. I think this was back in the, about 1997, 1998, when the farmers got their tractors and they didn't like what was going on. And they took their tractors to Washington, D.C. and embargoed the Capitol. So traffic couldn't come in and traffic couldn't come out. And on top of that, they got a 17-inch snowstorm that weekend. So really nobody could go in. That was a powerful statement. And so people should, growers, producers, ranchers, they should get together, write their Congress people, ensure that what their thoughts and ideas are in part of this 2023 Farm Bill. They're starting to negotiate, they're starting the conversations now. They are having some listening groups around the country, and they're supposed to get it passed this time next year.
Awesome. I could ask questions all day. And so, but we do have some great questions in the QA, and I encourage the audience to continue asking questions to the QA function. But we have a great question from the Presidente himself, Harrison. And the question is, how can automation and AI help shift our food systems from crop value being a function of tonnage to crop value being a function of nutritional density?
That's an excellent question. And I think that because of automation, you're going to be able to have a lot of the smaller, I guess, specialty crops being able to be offered to a lot of the different stores, grocery stores. As well as I said, you still have those farmers markets, which have really popped up and are very, very popular. I know that even down at the Department of Agriculture, every single Friday from, I think it's 10 to 3, farmers come and sell their wares to folks in the community, as well as people who are at Department of Agriculture, and it's always packed. They didn't have it during COVID, of course, so this is the first year back that they have had it. And it was, when I went down there, I took the young people from the camp there, and they were given a real lesson in growing, and a lot of those places also take EBT cards, so the people in the community can have nutritious food to eat on a regular basis. So I think that there's a lot of room for not only just tonnage, but also having those small batches of food available in the community.
Daniel, do you mind if I piggyback on to that?
Oh, I want to hear everybody's opinion on this. I think it's such a great question.
I think that when you're looking at a fundamental shift in crop value from tonnage to nutrition, first we have to just accept that the fact that we're having this conversation shows that there's a glut of food. Because if we were trying to make sure that people had the right allotment to have a healthy life and lifestyle, then I think there would be more focus on the actual nutrition and nutritional value of our produce. But unfortunately, the arcane food production and supply chain that associated with that kind of still is in power. And so, we waste a lot of food, and we don't grow nutrient dense food. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think as you start looking at the technology side, the focus of this data and AI and automation, you have indoor farms that have been able to change the mineral profile of leafy greens and other crops to make them more medically efficacious for people with kidney stones or with diabetes, and changing the actual chemical composition. And so I think that while that is incredible in what we're doing, it's not really, in fact, moving the needle on bringing or shifting crop value. If anything, it's putting a bigger barrier. We have another technologically only available food product only for the wealthy. Mm-hmm. I think that what you're really talking about is to shift that value. It's going to take some food scarcity where the entire globe starts rethinking what it is to be food safe, to have enough, and what that means. And I'm also going to throw it in there because I just can't. We're going to have to change our protein sources. As uncomfortable as that is, we're going to fully and require at least a different mindset around protein. One that I don't see shared amongst many of my North American colleagues and compatriots.
Just another quick hat tip. Tomorrow, alternate proteins panel, alternate crops, mushrooms, water lentils, and spirulina. And so we're talking about 3 more nutritionally dense crops being grown in very similar systems, actually, in all over the world, which great conversation. But David, to your point about making the crops more nutritious, thinking about things that maybe you're not already looking to grow has to be that first step. And I know Jonas has been trying to get everybody he knows to try his blue spirulina, which is good in context, but it's an adjustment for folks. And so, it takes, I guess there is that nutritional side where you have to get people to demand different crops at the same time that you're able to meet them, I would suppose.
And just acceptance, right?
Yeah.
It's what people will get used to. Before, years ago, nobody talked about gluten-free. Nobody. And now you're talking about alternative sources of food for people. And this is a global issue. If we're going to tackle climate change, we are going to have to absolutely change our protein basis. And the only way to do this is have these kinds of conversation on a global basis. I mean, there may be some people in some parts of the world who absolutely think locusts are the best thing since sliced bread. And they are, factually, they are, protein dense. But, you tell somebody here about, eating locusts and you get the frown on the face and they want to run the, yes, David, exactly. So it's all about education.
Yeah, I mean, on top of that too, there's a cultural tie to eating meat for, I think, so many people, like both here in the United States, but I think even especially elsewhere, right? So what you're asking people to do is fundamentally change culture to accommodate, to accommodate climate. And, my experience, say, like more working in kind of developing nations, is that's not going to happen, right? The more affluent that countries in Africa, South Asia get, the more meat they're going to want and the more meat they're going to grow. And that's just the reality. I mean, when things maybe I don't know when the inflection point there would be, now, in sort of in the United States, in Europe, I think we're at this level of affluence and prosperity where we can reasonably have these conversations and start thinking about what is our succession plan, from cow to cricket. But where most of the population growth is happening, where all the where as people get more affluent in those very densely populated, rapidly growing areas, there's no end to meat in sight there.
But Eric, look, you're 100% on it that it's Malthusian, right? That until your basic needs are met, you're not going to be quibbling about what protein source I care about. I have a roof over my head, I have water, I have food, I have heat. Then I'll start looking at a safe and recurring food source. But to have the conversations that we're having on this panel and that we're suggesting that we have as a society, it is a level of affluence that allows us to even have this conversation. We're not out hunting and gathering for more food so we survive. We're on a panel discussing agriculture and modern technology. So to that point, it is a total shift. And the affluence probably slows us down. Like I said, it'll be a global event where food has to be reconsidered because that population is continuing to grow exponentially. And as Malthus said, food production is arithmetic and the two are just never going to catch up. That's right. And so there is an inflection point. The goal, I think, that I'm hopeful for is that we can get ahead of it. We can change some of those cultural values, maybe not all together, but at least start softening them, right? I'll even open up to, okay, you're not ready to eat crickets. Let's start with more mushrooms. Let's talk about other protein sources. Mm-hmm. Let's at least start breaking that barrier down. So in 100 years, we're not having such a dire conversation.
Yeah, and I so agree. I think it makes sense to be like sort of smart and appreciate the nuance though about that's like, okay, where can we reasonably or realistically start this shift and not try to be like, okay, you're evil for eating a cow, try a cricket. It's more like, where can we get in?
Before we get too deep into the Malthusian rabbit hole that a lot of these conversations can clearly get into. And if you don't know what that is, good for you, because a lot of the worst things that have happened over the last 150 years are because of that theory. So we're not going to jump down there. But I will, from what I think, coming from a background in finance and accounting, is that economics actually are the way out, right? And I think that if it's at the end of the day, a lot of times we have to keep into consideration that if you're going to be creating all of this fancy new high-tech farm, right, where you're investing hundreds of millions of dollars, you have to make sure that you can get whatever your crop is to the market, to your customers at whatever their replacement cost is for that price. And so that happens at every level, right? You could do a hyper local, you could do a national. I think when you start to think about the fun examples, right, you have communities that are very far off the grid. Northern Canada, I've heard, where they have hot springs, where you have a geothermal energy source where you're actually able to convert energy into calories. How do you do that most effectively and efficiently? And there's a lot of technology that we need to figure out. And so continuing through the questions, which is actually a good segue into it, is, how do you think about evaluating all of this technology that's available to farmers if you are a farmer? How do you, I'll read the whole question because I think it's really well done. How do you think about evaluating the prospects of so many different startups and using similar technologies and making value-added claims on data and efficiency that are difficult to verify objectively in the field of time, and whether or not those benefits translate into a clear cost benefit for their target growers? Brian, fantastic question.
That is the question, right?
Yes, yes, it is. Yes, it
That
is.
is the question. Time will tell, I guess, is my answer there. Because, yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff is emerging and nascent, right? And it's not as a proven, AI-based image assessment's not as a proven, quantity as a gasoline or diesel-powered John Deere tractor, right? Like a farmer knows like how many horses that replaces, and they know immediately that as soon as that tractor breaks down, they know it's worth it to buy another one. And that's where, as startups who are trying to, commercialize some of these more like research-oriented technologies, and that is literally our job, is to answer this question. It's like, what is like the concrete value proposition? What is the cost benefit for this? And yeah, that's my job right now. So, but no answers, only more questions.
Right, exactly. I think as time goes on, technology, it will prove itself or disprove itself as we go along. And it takes a lot of research. If you have any young people in your domain, send them out on a search. If you're scared of using technology and scared of doing cost benefit analysis and comparisons, hire one of these really smart high school kids and bring them on. They will be able to figure it out in a day or two.
That's interesting, Joyce. When I think about it, I evaluate a lot of different ag tech startups and companies in my role. I approach it from a couple of different places. One is common sense. Does this make sense? Is what they are proposing logical? We're talking about influencing DNA using ultraviolet light. Is that possible? Is there research to support it? I also like to do a sanity check. A lot of these folks, throw out wild, crazy numbers and potentials and possibilities that, yes, you can extrapolate in a spreadsheet, but are they real? So do a little bit of napkin, we call it back of the napkin or back of the envelope. And it's just high order calculations to be like, are you even in an order of magnitude of being possible, or are you just way, way off the mark? And then if it passes those two sniff tests, I always like to focus on dissecting their research. We all went through, whether you were classically trained in university or you're in the school of life and you're a farmer, we all pay for our education one way or another, whether it was academic or otherwise. And so when you start looking at the research, look at the sample size, look at the methods, look at how it was conducted, and does this make sense? Again, and if it does, then ultimately, I think it is the adoption that will be the proof, because if it passes those tests, someone like me might want to be on the bleeding edge of technology and be willing to take that risk of furthering tech that might be a little before its time. Whereas once it is adopted by the masses, that's the proof, once it has large scale adoption.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question from Andres in Quito, Ecuador, which is great to see the global audience. Thank you for tuning in, Andres. what do you think is important to achieve the democratization of education so that farmers will have access to these benefits of technology in underdeveloped economies?
Can you repeat that question again?
Sure. It is, what are the most important resources to achieve the democratization of education so that farmers have access to this really powerful technology in underdeveloped economies?
I mean, I think from an educational standpoint, at least, what I've seen in West Africa, there's a pretty strong, research and like extension system there. Coming from the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture out through kind of various extension organizations throughout different, states and countries in West Africa, and actually throughout Africa, they work all across the continent. But yeah, I mean, I would say that the education system exists, but I think that there hasn't been enough attention on developing technologies and tools that are right sized to be adopted by farmers at these particular income levels. And it's a challenge, but I think the education is there. I mean, you have Bill and Melinda Gates, you have so much money, coming into doing training and other things like that. But I think a lot of these initiatives often are set up for failure because they weren't properly vetted, and they weren't meeting people where they were at, really. And I think when it comes to education, this is more of a design question. Like, we have to design solutions that are more likely to be adopted and successful, and that can have, even if it's just incremental progress, that is still huge, in a lot of these places.
And I would think that going back to USDA, they do have a foreign agriculture service, so that can offer, people in certain areas some educational and technical assistance.
I think that assistance is really important. When you talk about the democratization of education, you're really talking about the sharing of information. And I think that we're doing a pretty good job academically of sharing agricultural research. I think the problem falls into the fact that technology is developed with a preset expectation for a level of developmental technology in which it's going into. A level of automation in a greenhouse pre-assumes a level of automation existing in the greenhouse. So when you start looking at these underdeveloped countries, a lot of the technology that's advancing now isn't even applicable to them were they to be given the technology outright. I think what we're really talking about is wholesale economic changes in these underdeveloped countries that have to start with the food system again, so that people can focus on education. And then once we can solve that, we can start bringing their level of technology as a baseline up to allow us to bring in some of the newer tech. But I'm just wary of thinking that all tech could be immediately applied if only more money were available. That's not the case. As you said, there's money there, but this is a very big change culturally, politically, and economically.
Awesome. Question from Jayu. What do you think is a major hurdle for hydroponics adoption for general consumers and home growers?
Oh, it's the output. I think, for me, I've tried to do this at home, before. It's like, I spent like 6 months growing 2 pepper plants, inside. I got one meal out of that. So if that could grow a lot more, if I could get a lot more and, out of it, it's still, and even like, relatively automated grow systems like requires some maintenance.
Oh yeah.
So that cost benefits got to be there. And so I think that's my answer on bottleneck, is like, just doesn't grow enough.
I would say that, yeah, and also the bread maker problem, where it's really fun the first time, and then when you see how grimy and how much algae and dirt and dead plant matter and sometimes fungus gnats or thrips or aphids or some pest that gets into your indoor farm affects your entire house, and your wife asks you why there's little flies flying around all the time. I don't have any super personal experience with that, but I hope you can imagine. As we wrap up, I just have a 4-question lightning round, which I'd love everyone just to do quick answers for. What are your favorite crops to grow personally? And so we're just going to go quickly through these.
For me, it's tomatoes. I find I can't get a really good heirloom variety out of the grocery store. They're all designed for longevity and red color and firmness and nothing about flavor. So yeah, for me, it's going to be those heirloom tomatoes that I just can't get.
Joyce?
Not much for me because I am way too busy.
That's a better answer.
That is not my gift.
Eric?
Yeah, I like tomatoes, peppers, stuff that I can actually, use and cook with.
Do y'all have a favorite farm or some operation that you think is doing something really awesome and that you would call out that would really well represent some of the data AI stuff that we're doing?
So a favorite farm, I'm probably going to say Plant Delight Nursery, Tony Advent's joint, mostly because he wrote the book, So You Want to Start a Nursery, which if you're thinking about any ag business and you haven't read, it's a must read. It's not going to tell you anything about agriculture, but you'll learn about taxes, something that I think farmers should probably know about, how to set up a business and what an S Corp versus C Corp is. So this guy figured out a lot from the School of Hard Knocks in life, and he's sharing that information. When it comes to more of the indoor agriculture, I think that it's really interesting what some of the indoor leafy green farms are doing. So take a look at Living Green Farms in Minnesota to see some of their new tech. And I think that they're adding in some of their automation and robotics that are going to be moving the needle.
For me, I would say it's the Firebird Farm out in Beltsville, Maryland. That is a part of the University of the District of Columbia. So not only is it a growing farm where, people can come and harvest food for themselves, they can get plots and do some cool things, but it's also a research farm. And it's right across the street from the Agricultural Research Service. How convenient. And so I think that's the model example of where you can do some experimentation. And in the fall, probably in the next 6 or 8 weeks, they're going to be, after their harvest, they have a gleaning. So people from the community can come in and do gleaning on those things that have been left behind.
Yeah, I like a lot what the leafy green producers are doing, like the Bright Farms and the Gotham Greens, to give New York a shout out here, are doing, I like their approach, seems smart, kind of co-locate near cities, and they're making more of the incremental progress. I think, we see they're not going for like home run hitting, okay, let's put a greenhouse on every rooftop in every city. It's more like, making incremental progress towards that, reducing food miles for leafy greens and all that, which I appreciate that practical approach.
And for those that don't know, Gotham Greens, they build greenhouses they have a couple in Brooklyn where they're started on top of Whole Foods. And so they're able to source and deliver a lot of their, you talk about David reducing food miles as a model of really hyper locally figuring out distribution points for their crop. And they're one of New York's AgTech highlights. I mean, New York City is really why this is such a great organization, just pitching perspective again, is that over the last 5 or 6 years per capita, almost more money hasn't been invested in ag tech and vertical farming in New York City and its surrounding boroughs than just about anywhere else on the planet. Billions and billions of dollars, smart farms, smart farm entrepreneurs, and technologists, which is what our community is all about. And so 2 more lightning round questions. What is the most overhyped technology in a farm?
Self-driving.
Yeah, I would, yeah.
Dan, you said overhyped?
Overhyped, yeah.
I'll go with the self-driving. I mean, the autonomous savings of labor there can be demonstrated, but it needs to actually be put pretty well into practice to do it.
Okay.
And if the farmers aren't able to repair their own equipment,
It goes out
Yeah.
of the window.
Forget
Yeah.
it. Right. And then the most underhyped technology in a farm.
I don't know if you call it a technology, but I am bullish on cybersecurity. People aren't taking it seriously. They aren't protecting their data. They are answering emails with the phishing campaigns, and people have got to get really serious about cybersecurity.
If you're asking what underhyped technology might be, I'm going to go back to some pretty low tech sensors and equipment. I love a bricks meter. If you're a farmer and you want to understand how your crop is as a snapshot, don't look at the leaves. That's a signal of what has happened in the past. Look at the sugar levels within the plant. And so using that, and then the old instrument called a pencil, and writing down all your data, the leverage that we get with automated data collection is tremendous, but you still have the opportunity to record your data manually and make good decisions. So, just because it's not shiny or have a button on it, your pencil is still really valuable.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, this is not going to be a popular answer, but yeah, the gasoline engine. We're always so quick to move everything to electric, but gasoline is reliable and cheap for farmers now, and it's in case an electric vehicle gets stuck in the field, like, you're screwed. So there's still use for the gasoline engine on the farm.
My underhyped technology is a data integration platform. Anyone that's ever had to do a data reconciliation in Excel will understand how challenging that could be. We have a couple more questions if the panel wants to stay. You want to do a couple more quick questions from the audience?
A couple more.
Great. How would you improve energy efficiency at a controlled environment farm? That's a whole 5-hour conversation easily, if not multiple months.
I'm happy to go first. I mean, most of the farms I work with are indoor CEA farms. So the first thing we're looking at is their environmental control systems. Most people go directly to the lighting. It's actually your dehumidification and HVAC that traditionally are your biggest burn on utility. So we're going to look at the efficiency there, the SEER and the EAR rating, seasonal effective rating, and energy efficiency ratings to understand how they operate, how much energy they use. Then the low-hanging fruit becomes your lighting. If you're not at 3 micromoles per watt, then your lighting is by no means at the front of the industry. Go ahead and take a look at the DLC, the Design Light Consortium. It's a third-party independent provider that will assess people's lighting claims. People want to go into the crazy things people claim. Well, now you can have someone validate it. And so when you're looking at energy efficiency, those are your 2 biggest draws. But also think about things like whether a gas or electrical fire chiller is going to be more economical. If you're fortunate enough to live where you have geothermal, you can take advantage of hot springs and cooling. And even for the low tech guys, building those greenhouses partway underground can save tremendously on cooling costs. So it really can be a little bit of forethought in how you design your enterprise.
Great. Thoughts on augmented reality on a farm?
Well, I don't know, maybe for simulation environments, like augmented reality could be a good, I think, research tool for, say, people working on like robots in the field and, struggle to have that kind of, having a proper test environment without it being the actual field itself. So maybe augmented reality provides like a development platform for AI and automation on the farm.
I think also I'd say I've seen AI like augmented reality benefit investment more than practical everyday process improvement. I love the one where the guys put on the glasses and you're seeing the temperature and humidity and the vapor pressure, and Okay, but is that practical? Is that the information I need as I'm walking around the farm? It's not that you don't need the information, but do I need it as I walk around the farm? And is that helping? So I think it's a really cool technology, and I think it can add investable dollars, but I need someone to show me how it's actually going to improve my process and lower my cost of production, make my employees better at what they do.
Awesome. And then the last question, oh, anyone else? Joyce, you got something? All right. Last question. Thoughts about using thermal scissors for harvesting fruits? A new one to me.
What are thermal scissors?
Yeah, I was gonna
Same
say.
question, same
All right,
question.
fantastic.
I'm going to jump on it and say if thermal scissors are something that cauterize the wound as you're making a plant cut, okay, maybe, but that still isn't going to give me my best practices on prevention of disease. And being that I'm hyper focused right now on viroids, heat sanitation would have to get quite warm in order to be effective. So I'm going to stick with Virkon for now.
Awesome.
And by the way, ceramic scissors, everybody, a lot of the sanitation chemicals we're using destroy stainless steel. They make fantastic ceramic. You just clean them with the solutions, and the ceramic is completely sanitizable. So that's a little tip that we've used.
Wow, cool.
All right. Thank you, everybody. So as we wrap up, just ask all the panelists do a quick 30-second soundbite, how to connect, find more information, point eyeballs and attention towards whatever you're working on that you want people to see.
Okay, well, I'll start first, and you could go to www.cyberag, that's cyberag.org for cyber ag information. And if you're interested in seeing some of the past things that the teenagers have done in my data science camp, that's www.datasteamcamp.org.
Awesome.
If you'd like to reach out to me, it's David.Kessler, Kessler at agrify.com, Agrify. If you'd like to check out our technology, you can go to agrify.com or on any of the social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. Feel free to check out at Agrify Corp, and you will be brought to all of our feeds. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me personally. I'm happy to answer all of those that come up.
Yeah, feel free to add me on LinkedIn. It's Eric Hager, ERICHAGER. Check out Bloomfield Robotics for all our cool work that we're doing in grapes out here in California. Website is bloomfield.ai. And my email is just my first and my last name, eric.hager@bloomfield.ai. And I'll put my stuff in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, so much on behalf of the NYC Ag Collective. Thank you for attending our 2022 AgTech Week virtual conference. This stuff's going to be available for a long time. Thank you again to our amazing panelists, David, Joyce, Eric. I appreciate it so much. Thank you for jumping in. I thought this conversation was amazing. And the next panel, we have a little bit of a lunch break, is going to be at 2 o'clock. Where we're really going to blow the doors off the hydroponics and education topic. I am so excited to keep seeing everyone there. And thank you for coming out.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.